I first met Ron Batory when I was a Senate staffer, part of the team tasked with vetting his nomination for Federal Railroad Administrator. So Ron arrives at the Senate Hart Building, and we all sit down. After pleasantries, we start asking him about substance, railroading and management, safety and operations, and Ron starts dropping fact after fact, not just opinion. He shows laser focus on FRA's mission rather than scoring points. He tells us what he really thinks, eschewing political platitudes. Our eyes get big. Facts, focus, directness. This is Washington. What the heck is going on? Ron impressed senators so much that he was voted out of committee unanimously. And Senator Thune, chairman of the committee and now Senate Majority Leader, took to the floor to press for his confirmation. Emphasizing Ron's vast railroad experience, including his time as an executive, of course, with Conrail and the BRC, the chairman called him a respected leader in driving organizational change and, most importantly, advancing safety improvements, inciting railway age, calling him the best qualified person to lead the Federal Railroad Administration in a very long time, perhaps in the agency's history. Indeed, when Ron was confirmed and placed at the helm of FRA, he delivered for the American people. Consider positive train control. In 2015, as the Government Accountability Office reported, many railroads were years behind the original statutory deadline. And some railroads faced substantial risk of not making the extended deadline. One railroad was about 10% of implementation after 10 years. Ron got to work. When I soon visited with him, when he was FRA administrator, he had a comprehensive matrix showing each railroad's progress towards critical milestones. He had active, regular communication protocols, not just with senior management, but with the contractors and others critical to implementation. In short, he was in complete command. And he drove organizational change across the industry in pursuit of statutory fidelity and safety improvement. I believe no other administrator could have achieved industry-wide compliance as quickly and as effectively as Ron Batory. And he did so while developing FRA's new, substantially expanded infrastructure programs. Consider Chrissy, near and dear to the hearts of many in this room. It had been years since FRA had a meaningful freight grant program, and Ron took over soon after Congress enacted programs totaling 9 figures per year. Ron got to work. He delivered significant upgrades and growth enhancements for short line and regional railroads, recognizing the broad public benefits you all create and we've heard about today. And his infrastructure decisions are in the praise of leaders across the country, including Senate Democratic Whip Dick Durbin. And yes, for those keeping score, Ron's leadership has been praised by Senate leadership on both sides of the aisle. His smart safety and infrastructure improvements should unite us all. And long odds never deterred him. He even delivered on Amtrak standards and metrics after a decade of legal battles and on the precipice of irreconcilable conflict. And in the midst of these policy accomplishments, he comprehensively reformed the agency, empowering senior staff to execute a vision to best accomplish their mission, serving as a model for all change agents and leaving a lasting legacy. Of course, management success and operational excellence were nothing new for Ron. Immediately prior to his time at FRA, as you all know, Ron was president and CEO of Conrail. Ron assumed these responsibilities in an enormously challenging environment, overseeing the 8th largest freight carrier in the country with a complex network and following the division of the railroad among NS and CSX and the subsequent creation of the shared assets area. But Ron got to work. Under Ron's leadership, as Jim Blaze reports, Conrail's productivity soared. At the same time, derailments went down by about 2/3. FRA reportable employee injuries were reduced by more than 1/3. When considering Ron's accomplishments, one Conrail employee remarked that because the railroad had already been so precise under Ron, we don't need anybody to teach us about PSR. We've done it since 1999. We call ours RLB. He left a legacy helping leaders grow and provide more focused operations, sometimes discussed over train trips, with one industry leader that worked with him at Conrail sharing that Ron was always thinking ahead. He was the right person for the job, and that was precisely why NS and CSX recruited him for the Belt Railway of Chicago, where he served as president. At the BRC, Ron led the largest intermediate switching company in the country, connecting 17 railroads with a constantly evolving group of owners. But again, Ron got to work, and he led the BRC to record safety, service, and financial success while significantly upgrading its infrastructure. He also initiated studies on the assets, capacity, operations, and movements in the Chicago terminal that informed the initial study for the CREATE project. Reflecting on Ron's tenure leading the BRC, one industry veteran who worked with him at the time shared that he managed an octopus railroad with connections to everything, to new heights, and with a rigorous attention to the correct numbers, facts, not just opinion, as I saw in the very first time I met him. So how did Ron become this Hall of Fame leader? True, he has railroading in his blood. His father was a car checker for the New York Central. And he has deep and vast expertise, line and staff experience, operational and administrative, spanning 50 years. From a union craft position with the DT&I to train master and director of transportation planning roles for the Grand Trunk Western, to VP and GM roles with Chicago, Missouri, and Western, and Southern Pacific, Ron knows the network inside and out. And you've heard about his focus on facts, from the PTC implementation matrix to his detailed safety, service, and financial metric tracking as a railroad executive. But what I think separates Ron is his integrity and passion. Integrity that has earned him the trust across the industry, including from Class 1 CEOs and COOs, and many in this room, for confidential counsel on the most sensitive of topics. Integrity that has led to his selection as a trustee for the voting trust of the largest merger this century, and again for the voting trust in a recent short line transaction. In fact, Ron knows that I call him the most trusted man in railroading. And passion. Passion that, in his so-called retirement, has allowed me to keep him on the phone past midnight discussing the design of service metrics and the implications of the STB employment statistics. I got to tell you, it doesn't really feel great as an STB chairman when Ron knows your employment data better than you do, but that's beside the point. Passion that has led him to continue teaching both senior government and railroad leaders and those just starting off in their career. And passion that now brings his immense skills to the Amtrak board, to which he was unanimously confirmed by the Senate. Indeed, after more than 50 years, Ron is still at work, making the industry and our country better. I'm excited to see what he does next. And with that, I'm pleased to introduce my friend and mentor, Railroad Hall of Famer, Ron Batory.
Well, Chuck, thank you for the remarks, and Patrick, I'm going to take a couple extra minutes. Patrick, you took some of the bullets out of my gun. But I think it was probably, it'll be 8 years next month, he and I met. And when you're up for confirmation, what transpires is they assign you, the acronym is Sherpa, and you're basically escorted around the Senate, meeting senators both sides of the aisle. And in this case, it was to meet the Senate Commerce Committee. I walk in the room, and there's about 15 or 20 people in the room at the time. And it was Patrick, because he led the committee on behalf of Senator Thune, started asking questions. And it was like a morning call at 6 in the morning, working on the railroad, listening to him ask these questions. And it was like hockey pucks before a game coming at the goal. And so I thought, okay, here we go. And all of a sudden we had 15 people watching Ron Batory and Patrick Fuchs carry on a conversation. And it was a very, very memorable experience. And I said to myself, I don't know who this guy is, but he is tremendous. And every question that you would answer, he would have a follow-up question too. And he'd be dynamite on a 6 o'clock conference call. But all that said, Patrick, and publicly, Mr. Chairman, having your accessibility, having your listening, having your expression, having your support, and just being a good sounding board. Here's somebody twice your age saying thank you for being my mentor. And the moral of that story is you're never too old to learn. So, Patrick. So, what I'm going to do here, and I'm going to try very hard to abbreviate as much as possible, but characterize a little bit about my career and how it relates to all of you in this room, your predecessors that are not in this room, perhaps, people alongside you that you have relationships with, because I'll lace this up at the end that there's a lot of importance towards people in the railroad industry. In my case, and we joke about it at times, it started in 1950. And I can't explain it other than it seems like every memory that I can recall, I had an interest in railroads. Not trains, railroads. And it grew. So from 1950 to 1971, whether I was at school, out playing Little League baseball, riding my bike, trading baseball cards, playing marbles, whatever those things were back in the 50s, I was always daydreaming about the railroad business. And I wanted to be part of the business. And I was fortunate enough that my father worked for the railroad, as Patrick talked about. He was a Polish immigrant, World War II veteran, hired out on New York Central, decided to pursue a career in rail labor, and retired as an international officer. So we had some real interesting Christmas and Thanksgiving dinners as I got older. But all that said, I want, as I said, daydreamed a lot about being part of the railroad industry. No specific job, just want to be part of it. And that daydreaming turned into a living dream in 1971. And I've kind of capsulized one time. Some of you know the gentleman. He's somewhat retired now, Fred Fraley, that wrote for Kiplinger Letter and Trains Magazine, and capsulized my look back over, at that time, 4 careers, and now it's been of decades, now 5 decades. In that first decade of the 1970s, I call my stop, look, and listen decade. Because you're entering in an industry, you really don't know anybody, you don't know a lot, but I had the energy and the enthusiasm, the want for more education, the want for more experience, to listen and learn from those around me, both above, alongside, and it was an excellent decade. The railroads were fragile financially. Some were already into bankruptcy, the biggest one being Penn Central at the time. I was encouraged to hire out with a Penn Central subsidiary that was very profitable as a result of its affiliation with the auto industry. And as a result, it turned out to be the right right decision. I started out in train service, bought an automobile, got the car payment book from GMAC, got laid off before I could make the first payment. Was walking from the crew room through the yard office. Some freight agent came up to me and said, "Can I help you?" And I said, "Yeah, I need a job." And he said, "Why?" He said, "I can get you on summer relief." So I started clerking in the yard office. And then one day I got a phone call about going to the general office, and heard that the vice president of operations wanted to meet me. And I thought, boy, what did I do now? And so I went in there, and he told me that he had heard about me and suggested that he didn't have a formalized training program, but he would give me the key ring to the railroad, and it was mine to learn. And that was my first mentor. And with that, I was able to serve in transportation, industrial engineering, track actually first. We didn't fix a lot of track back then. All we did was pick up cars. 70s were bad years. And then I found myself right around the formation of Conrail. I was called in, and they said, "We want you to head up capital planning, industrial engineering, and purchasing materials." And I thought, well, that's the end of my career. Because back then, you thought of purchasing materials people being, scotch and steak and, purchase orders. And it was a whole different world back then. And a gentleman told me, he said, "Ron, take that job because you're going to make acquaintances and friendships that you'll have for your entire career." Best advice I ever got. And some of those people still exist today, and we're still in contact with each other. So that went a little longer than I wanted to on the first decade, but that was my, as I call it, my stop, look, and listen. The second decade was the 80s. That was the change agent era. That's where you heard Keith Hartwell talk about the Staggers Act. And railroads got very competitive among themselves. The M&A side started to act up and increase some speed about itself. Norfolk Southern was created in the early 80s. Union Pacific and Missouri Pacific got together in the early 80s. Penn Central, or Conrail, was trying to find itself as far as getting away from the federal government. So we basically, as an industry, if it didn't move, we got rid of it. We constantly looked for rationalization opportunities, re-engineering opportunities, how to maximize and stress assets. Now, doesn't that sound like a PSR a little bit? Okay, well, maybe that was the preamble, and PSR is just a soundbite. But the 80s were very rewarding. DT&I was acquired by the Grand Trunk Western. And near the end of that decade, I had an opportunity. Somebody called me and said, "Would you be interested in working for a regional railroad?" Now, up to that point, the only person I had met that was associated with short line railroads was early in the 80s with Howard Croft, that was president of the Short Line Association. The regional railroad had not been established yet, and nor the merger. So as a result, had an opportunity to leave the Grand Trunk Western. The people there at the time were very supportive. They said the door swings two ways. Go do your thing. And so I ended up working for two very astute gentlemen that were court-appointed trustees, Governor Ogilvie from the state of Illinois, that had been the trustee of the Milwaukee Road, and then he was the trustee of the CMNW. And then he was succeeded by Daniel Murray, who had represented the Crown family in the Rock Island bankruptcy as the creditor, protecting the creditor. So I served with those two, and we were instrumental in saving the regional railroad from liquidation. Citibank of North America was working very hard in the bankruptcy court to get cessation of service and liquidation. That today is a high-speed rail between St. Louis and Chicago for Union Pacific. And this West End is now CPKC after preceding KCS and Gateway Western. Had the opportunity from that, was approached by Southern Pacific to join their team after Phil Anschutz bought the railroad from Santa Fe Corporation after the merger was denied between SP and Santa Fe. And we created a separate corporation called SPCSL, and Phil and his team here in Denver wanted to get access to Chicago from both St. Louis and Kansas City. And I was fortunate enough to be one of the players on their executive team to make that come to fruition. Learned a great deal from that gentleman and his team. Some of you may be aware of the fact that he's real estate, oil, comes from the entertainment field, but while he had Southern Pacific, he did a lot of great things. And learned a lot. And then from that, in the 1990s, in that third, if you will, that third decade of what I call innovation and expansion, I left the Southern Pacific and was solicited by some of the owning roads of the BRC, of which SP was not an owning road, if I wanted to come to Chicago. I had already had 2 tours in Chicago and was familiar with the BRC and welcomed the opportunity, and that's where I met Bill Loftus, that was president of this organization. And then that was also during the time when, I don't know if Peter Gilbertson's still here, but I remember Peter Gilbertson and Ed Burkhart were instrumental in creating the Regional Railroads of America before the two ultimately merged. And in the 1990s, BRC was transformed from a 100% joint facility operation to a for-profit operation. And it was a very, if you will, from my perspective, rewarding experience. I enjoyed working with the people that I joined every day. And with that, I thought, you know, life couldn't get any better. And my wife is from Chicago. This was my 3rd tour in Chicago. And one day I got a phone call, and it was from Steve Tobias, that was EVP of NS. And back then, you know, you didn't have iPhones yet. You had the pink slip. While you were out, somebody called you. So I got this pink slip, and I immediately called a couple people in the office, and I said, "Is everything okay with Norfolk Southern?" And they said, "Yeah, why?" And I said, "Never mind, I just want to know." So I called Steve there in Norfolk, and he says, "How's your day?" Well, I know he didn't call me to ask me how my day is, okay? And this was in 1997, and he said that CSX and NS had reached an accord on the breakup of Conrail, and he and Carpenter and Snow and Good had agreed they wanted me to come over to Conrail. And it was one of those opportunities you say, well, if you say no, paybacks, excuse my French, can be hell, okay, especially when they're going to end up owning 50% of the company. So I thought, it's never been done before. It's a challenge. What do you have to lose? So I went to Philadelphia, and that brought on, if you will, what I'll call the fourth series of decades, which is challenges and opportunities. And the first 10 years, we basically, as you know, took Conrail apart. It wasn't necessarily a clean cut on split date, but we finally trimmed the edges and got it refined to what it was supposed to look like. And the people there have done an extremely good job. And I was very proud of the fact that the people that did the job were the ones that were there when I first got there. And I played the hand I was dealt. And they did a tremendous job. So with that, I had marked up on my calendar that I would probably retire in 2017. And I enjoyed every moment that I was working on behalf of CSX and NS, leading the not only the Conrail Shared Asset franchise, but the corporate entity itself. And then the day after the presidential election in 2016, I got a phone call one morning from an individual that need not be shared, but he said, "What do you think?" And not unlike maybe some of you in the audience, I was surprised. And I said, "I wasn't expecting this one." And he said, "Well, I got a question for you." And what's that? He said, "Would you be interested in serving as FRA administrator?" And, after working on the railroad, he never turned down a transfer or promotion or anything. So I said, "Yeah, fine. I'd welcome that opportunity. Be honored. Keep me on the short list." So we all know it eventually materialized. The part that was somewhat interesting was he told me to go into the website, and I think it was like Make America Great Again or something like that. And he said, "Fill it out, and as soon as you fill it out, let me know that you filled it out, and don't put down any position other than FRA administrator. So you do as you're instructed." So I went home that night late, and there's empty nester, just me and Barbara in the house. And I told her what I did. Fortunately, REI was closed. Otherwise, I would have been buying a pup tent when I told her what I did. So that phone call happened in November. And I had a couple meetings with Secretary Chow and her staff, and it was right near the end of March, before I was about ready to retire, and Secretary called and said, "I've made my decision, and I'd like you to serve on my team. And are you still interested or agreeable, whatever?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Do you want to talk to your wife?" And I said, "I've never talked to her since about." So we found ourselves going through the vetting process, similar to what other administrators and appointees have went through, what Dave Fink's going through right now. And it got delayed a little bit until, and then later it got unanimously confirmed. But it had nothing to do with me personally. It was some politics in Washington, and one senator put a brick on some appointees, but it eventually got taken off. So I experienced the FRA, and I had always worked very closely with the FRA during my entire field assignments, no matter what company I worked with. And somewhat had, especially during those bankruptcy years, with the regional railroad, I was in Washington a fair amount. So going to Washington, I really welcomed the opportunity. And to those of you that have already interfaced with career people within DOT and at FRA, having lived in that tent, I can't say enough for the career staff of FRA. They were tremendous. The field people are tremendous. okay? They are very responsive, okay, to doing what is right. And, you know, it's just one of those memorable experiences that I want to share with you. And you know, we all have our stories about FRA, especially those of us in operations and maintenance, okay? But it's an organization that has a purpose, and I think collectively they serve that purpose well. This now that I've shared with you 4 of those of the 5 decades, 4 categories of the 5 decades. The current one I kind of call engagement and contribution. So when I left the FRA, you know, I went back to Santa Fe, New Mexico. As far as I was concerned, you know, the game's over, fold up the tent, and the phone started ringing. I didn't ring doorbells, okay, but the phone would ring, and there were people that I knew, and they would say, Ron, would you be interested in doing this, or what's your opinion on this? And so one day I just told some folks, I said, you know, it's real simple. I love this industry, I love its people. So if it's about the railroad, they'll take you to the goal line. And if I like you and trust you, okay, it takes you into the end zone. And so as a result, since I've left government in 2021, it's been a very enjoying time, if you will, to say that you're retired, but you're still engaged. And, you know, I'll hear things about what goes on in the railroad industry today, and I'll say to myself, well, it's something that I probably can't relate to real well. It's not my norm, but that doesn't mean it's wrong. That's just the evolution of change, and it's all good. And the more I hear about the change that's taken place in the industry, the experience, the education, the energy, the enthusiasm that's joining this industry, I see nothing but bright lights ahead. And with this opportunity to try to lace together my career as it relates to all of you in this room, let me tell you a couple of things, and a couple of them might be a little redundant to what Patrick brought up, but the first one is this: dedicate yourself to a purpose. The second one is unwavering commitment. Your word, your handshake, your signature is your bond. And that's your commitment. And it's got to be unwavering. Communication. There is no such thing as too little communication. The more communication we have together will foster a relationship. And if you keep that momentum of communication going, that relationship will strengthen. And eventually, it can percolate into trust. And if you maintain communication, strengthening that relationship, and then ultimately having that trust, when you really need each other, you already believe in each other. The other one is don't ever fear change or challenges. It will open a door of opportunity for you, whether you're in service, sales, railroad operations, the commercial department of railroads, finance, legal. Don't fear change or challenge. The other one is, and this is hindsight, but you look back over your career, and there isn't one day in my career I would trade. But during that career, I probably would have contemplated trading my worst days. But in hindsight, those worst days have become my best days because those were the days I learned the most. This is the one Patrick talks about, and this has to do with facts. You know, without facts, it's just another opinion. And there's all of us, me included. You can fall into syndrome at times of, I call it the non-invented here syndrome. If it's not my idea, it won't work, okay? And there's a tendency of us all to fall into that trap at times. But if you use just facts, nothing else, no experience, just facts, you're probably going to bat 500. If you use gut instinct and experience, but ignore facts, you're probably going to bat 500 again. But if you can figure out how to blend facts with experience, my experience both personally as well as observing others that I've learned from over the years, you'll bat 750 plus. There's also the importance of always having a sense of urgency when you're pursuing initiatives. Nothing's more boring than watching paint dry. And another one that I feel very strong about is, and again, we all have egos, but don't read your business card too much. And what I mean by that is, you make the title doesn't make you. And you're only as good as the people around you. So that brings me to the another item about treating people the way you want to be treated. And listening and watching, I think, are the two strongest attributes all of us have. Okay, followed by our mouth. And there's something about the fact I think God gave us 2 eyes, 2 ears, and only 1 mouth. So use the eyes and ears first before you use your mouth. And the last one is, it's not about how much money you spend. We were talking about the tax credit of $3,500. It's still there. Yes, it needs to be escalated, but it's not about the value of the money. It's how wisely it's spent and utilized. So sum all this up in the lacing that I was referring to. We are a family in this room. We're a family in this industry. Families have happiness, they have sadness, they have agreement, they have disagreement, they have successes and failures, but that's what makes us good. And so with that being said, what you learn today will be beneficial to you tomorrow. And also, never forget about yesterday. And all of you have the capability, individually and collectively in this room, to make this industry bigger and better than it ever has in its history. And it's not, and my generation had an opportunity, and we think with it, we served it well. We seized a lot of opportunities in resizing the industry, but the future of this railroad industry is based on the importance of proper application of technology and becoming, if you will, more threaded into the supply chain of the logistics world as we know it, because that is what's going to drive surface, air, and marine transportation. And rail has a tremendous amount of promotion and possibilities of leading the way when it comes to surface transportation. Now, the lights are a little dimming here, but I would like all of you to stand up, congratulate yourselves, shake hands with each other, because in my mind, okay, stand up, come on, don't be bashful. All of you, except those that partied too hard last night. And you are the future of this industry, and you're going to determine tomorrow's future. And with that, I just want to say thank you for your time, thank you for listening, and the fact that I look forward to seeing what all of you can accomplish both individually and collectively for this industry that, as I said in the beginning, I truly love. Thank you.